It's 2012, and I'm a finance manager in the automotive industry. I'm in my 20th year. I don't like what I do anymore. My life isn't happy and fulfilled any longer. So at the same time as I'm a finance manager in the car business, I'm also in an intense leadership training program. Now, this leadership training program would have me go 1 weekend, 1 month to New York, and 1 weekend of another month to San Francisco. Well, this particular weekend was going to be the very first time I went to New York. Talk about excited. We left the night before so we could arrive the day before the conference. And we get there in the morning and get settled in. And of course, I'm going to go shopping. It's New York. So I head out for the day. And the city, has anybody been to New York? Isn't it friggin' unbelievable? It is such a vibrant, exciting city to be in. It feels great. And I got some really great deals. So there was that. So I went back to the hotel room, got a really great night's sleep, and I went to the conference the next morning. I walk into the room, and there's, I don't know, maybe 250 people all together. And I was very excited for this. I was seeing some people that I didn't get to see very often again, and the energy in the room was just alive. So I made my way to my seat with a friend of mine that I had traveled with, and we were getting ourselves all organized, putting my stuff away and hanging up my purse on the side of the chair. And I turned to him and I said, "Oh my God, I am so excited to be back in San Francisco. I'm going to the wharf for lunch. Are you going to come with me?" And he looked over and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "You know we're in New York, right?" And I'm like, "Okay." And he turns back to his friend, and I'm thinking the whole time, like, I don't know what's the matter with him, but this is definitely San Francisco. And I'm going to the wharf at lunch. And I stood there for a minute, and then I started to feel a heat. Started at the bottom of my feet, and rose up my body. And I started to get dizzy, so I sat down. And I put my hands on my forehead and my head between my knees because I thought I was going to pass out. And then everything went blank. I had no idea where I was. It took 2 or 3 minutes for this to pass. And I sat up straight again, and I looked around the room, and I realized that actually, yes, I was in New York. I'd had no idea. With tears in my eyes, I turned to my friend and I said, "Something is seriously wrong." But that event was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. You see, I'd had other things happening before I got there for a few months before. I was having out-of-body experiences. I was getting lost in my own neighborhood. I would leave work to drive home, and I would have to pull over to the side of the road because I had no idea where I was. And I had to sit there for a minute to sort myself out, and then I would realize I was maybe 2 or 3 blocks from my own house. I would go to read something, a book or a sign, and the words would be all jumbled. And it would take a minute for them to clear themselves up. So when I got back from New York, and at that point, I really was just putting it up to stress. My job was extremely intense. I was being bullied at work by one of the business managers I was working with. My marriage had broken down. I had financial problems. So I thought that's all it was until New York. And when I came back, I made an appointment with my doctor. During the first appointment with her, I explained to her what had happened, and she started doing cognitive testing. Alzheimer's and dementia run in my family, and I was scared that perhaps I had early onset Alzheimer's. That was not it. So she sent me for an MRI, a brain scan. Has anybody had one of those before? You have. That in itself is a little freaky, right? So I had the brain scan, A couple days later, I got called back into the office because the results were in. And I sat at the table with her, looking at a computer screen with an image of my brain on it. And all over my brain were little white dots. And she said, Jill, those dots, those are brain lesions. And then she put her hand on mine and she said, I don't know for sure, but it looks like it might be MS. I have no idea what she said after that. My brain went to, you've just been handed your death sentence. It's going to be long and slow and painful. I left that room in shock. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to turn. This was certainly not the response I thought was going to happen when I went in her office that day. The following day, I found out that it wasn't MS, but they also had no idea what it was. So, of course, more tests, blood tests, cognitive tests, all of that stuff. They had no idea, and so I started doing my own research. One day I was in my kitchen with a girlfriend of mine when all of this was going down, not long after that initial conversation. And I was cooking her dinner. I'm standing at the counter chopping vegetables, and I looked at her and I said, Christine, it's happening. She said, what? I said, I'm having an out-of-body experience right now. And she said, what's that? And I said, well, basically what's happening right now is I can see myself chopping vegetables and I can hear myself talking, but I am not in my body. I'm up here somewhere. And then she said something that would change the course of my life. She said, Jill, have you ever heard of a Kundalini awakening? A kunda what? This was like, I had barely dipped my toe into the conversations of spirituality at that point. I had been raised Catholic, rejected the religion for the dogma, but my heart was crying out for something. So I'd started this journey, but that language was brand new to me. Has anybody else heard of a Kundalini awakening? Well, I looked it up. Where do you guys go when you don't know the answer to something? The Google, exactly. We go to the Google. So I went to the Google and I found one of those tests, like 10 ways to tell if you're a psychic. I found 100 symptoms of a Kundalini awakening. And I went down the list, checking all of them off. By the time I got to the bottom, I checked off 99 symptoms, plus bonus brain lesions. This was definitely a Kundalini awakening. So for those of you that don't know what it is, and even for those of you that do, I'm going to give you my version of it. When we are walking through our life, and we are doing things that are not truly what we're meant to do in this life, because I believe we have an agreement before we get here, what it is that we're going to show up as on the planet. And when we're not paying attention, the universe will start to give us signs. Oftentimes it starts with a little tap on the shoulder, and then maybe it'll shake you a little, and then eventually it throws you on the ground. So my little tap on the shoulder, and there were several of them, this is how it goes. One of them was, I had went to the same psychic several times throughout the year, randomly. I would walk into a shopping mall and she would happen to be there. None of it was planned. She never knew who I was from one time to the next. It happened 4 different times. But every time she said some version of this. What I hear, Jill, is they want to know when you're going to wake up and start doing what you said you were going to do when you got here. I mean, a little strange for someone who didn't really get into those things at that time. We didn't really know anything about that, but still there was something about it. And I ignored it. The more of the shake that would happen, one of the shakes that happened, was when I was just before having these experiences, these brain lesions in the car business still, and I was being bullied by another business manager. My marriage had broken down. My life was really quite disastrous internally. Externally, it looked great. I had unbelievable shoe collection. But of course, I didn't listen to that either. And as you know, the throwdown was the brain lesions. The conversation about the Kundalini awakening changed my life. I started on another path of healing for myself. I started investigating what else was possible. I took alternative measures. I did ayahuasca journeying, which is a plant medicine. I started dipping much more deeply into the conversations around spirituality and purpose and what are we doing here. Today, I love my life. Those brain lesions, they're gone. They can't explain it. They have no idea why. I don't know why, really. I have no proof of why this happened, other than to say that I chose to walk the path that I was meant to on the planet. I'm going to leave you with this. We all have difficult times in our lives. Consider that those challenges are meant to wake you up. They are opportunities to step into and begin to live the intended purpose that you had when you got here. Thank you.
Always. Jill Prescott.